The cuffs were cold, tighter than they needed to be, digging into the wrists of a man who hadn't raised his voice, let alone his hand. He sat quietly on the curb, sweat clinging to his neck despite the breeze, while the officer thumbed through the documents he'd already explained twice. "Look, sir," the cop muttered, squinting at the notarized will like it was written in a foreign tongue. "We've just got to confirm a few things." Behind them, a woman in yoga tights and a Patagonia pullover clutched her toddler and watched from across the street, nodding to herself like justice was being served. The house loomed behind him, his grandmother's house. His house, the porch where she'd shell peas in the summer, the window she used to wave from when he came home from school. Now it stood half empty, waiting for him to breathe life back into it. But instead of a key in his hand, he had steel. And, instead of welcome, he had suspicion. 2 hours earlier, Darius Jefferson hadn't been back in over a year, not since the funeral, not since the neighbors waved politely but never offered condolences, not since the new construction across the street started, rows of sterile white boxes with rooftop patios and unfamiliar cars. He parked his Honda just behind the fence, the gate still hanging like it always did, a little crooked. His mother had begged him to sell. His sister said it was too far gone, but he didn't care. Grandma Odell had left it to him, not because he was the favorite, but because he showed up. Because when her hands trembled too much to pour water, he was the one refilling the pitcher. Because he knew the name of her doctor, her favorite hymns, and how she liked her cornbread. Because he'd earned it. The house was dusty, but standing proud. The screen door still creaked. The linoleum still peeled near the fridge, but it was home. He had just popped the trunk to grab his toolbox when he heard it. "Excuse me? Hello?" He turned. A woman was standing halfway on his walkway, a stroller, angled behind her. She looked confused, maybe concerned. "Can I help you?" he asked, polite but firm. She blinked. "I saw you come in. Are you with the contractors?" Darius tilted his head. "No, ma'am, I own the house." Her face flickered to a micro-expression, quickly masked. "Oh, I just didn't recognize you." He nodded once and turned back toward the house. She stayed a beat too long. 15 minutes later, the squad car rolled in. No sirens, no urgency. Just slow authority pulling to a stop behind his car. Darius was on the porch unscrewing a broken light fixture. "Sir, can we talk to you for a moment?" He wiped his hands on his jeans, walked down with the same steady gait he used in courtrooms. "Of course, what's this about?" There was a call about a break-in. His heart didn't race, not yet. He pulled the folder from his backpack. The deed transfer, the will, the notarized affidavit. He was ready. But it didn't matter. Turn. "Around for me, please," the younger officer said. "Wait, why?" "I can show—" "Sir, you're not under arrest. Just detaining you for safety." The cuffs clicked. He sat there for 23 minutes. Enough time for 2 more neighbors to step out. One took a photo. One crossed the street to chat with the woman in the yoga tights. They hadn't asked for his ID. They hadn't looked up the property records. They hadn't even Googled the address. They had just assumed. Darius didn't speak. Not at first. He watched the sky shift above him. Clouds, rolling slow like judgment. The concrete beneath him was warm now. His wrists were still tight, the zip of the cuffs refusing to loosen, despite his calm voice and perfectly filed paperwork. The older officer had started to look uneasy. His partner, younger and all too eager, leaned back on the cruiser like he was doing Darius a favor. "You said you're the owner," the older one said again, flipping through the documents. "Mind explaining how that came to be?" Darius lifted an eyebrow. "Sure. My grandmother, Odell Jefferson, passed last year. Left the house to me in her will. I filed the transfer, paid the taxes, and updated the deed. You can check the county records." The officer glanced at the woman across the street, who was now holding her phone up as if recording or preparing to. She said no one's lived here in years. Darius exhaled slowly, the way he had when juries ignored evidence. That's correct, it's been vacant. I moved out of state for work, I just returned. Work? The young one cut in. What do you do? Darius turned his head slowly, until his gaze locked with the young officer's. His voice didn't rise. I'm an attorney. Silence. The older officer shifted. Law firm? Civil rights. I work on wrongful detentions, police misconduct, systemic bias, cases like this one. The words were weightless, casual, but they landed hard. The young cop straightened up like he'd been yanked by a string. The older one cleared his throat, muttered something into his shoulder mic. The energy changed, but Darius didn't move. He let them sit with it. 20 minutes later, they unfastened the cuffs. No apology, just, thanks for your cooperation. He stood slowly. Wrists red and aching. You may want to consider carrying proof with you, the older one added, holding out the folder like a library book returned late. Especially in this neighborhood. Darius took the papers back. Whose neighborhood? He asked. The man didn't answer. Back inside the house, Darius sat in his grandmother's old chair, the one with the armrest worn soft where her elbow used to rest while knitting. He placed the folder on the coffee table. He didn't need to read it. He'd memorized every line, every clause. It wasn't just a will. It was a promise. And outside, the woman was still standing near the edge of the lawn, watching, like she was waiting for him to leave. That night, Darius unpacked the essentials: a mattress on the floor, a small lamp, a binder full of scanned documents, and one thick envelope addressed to Mr. D. Jefferson from the county office. Inside, confirmation of a complaint he had filed 2 months earlier, after noticing the same neighborhood association had illegally rezoned a cluster of inherited black-owned homes without notice. It wasn't just about him. It never was. He looked through the front window. The lights were still on at the house across the street. The stroller was gone, but the blinds twitched. Just once. Let them look, because now he was staying. By the second morning, the neighborhood's smile had soured. It wasn't loud, not yet, just the subtle choreography of exclusion. Joggers who used to nod now crossed the street. A man with a leaf blower paused long enough to let the dust cloud roll into Darius's yard. A flyer advertising a neighborhood safety coalition appeared, tucked into his mailbox twice. Darius didn't flinch. He folded the flyer and slid it into a drawer with the others. He had started documenting everything. Time, date, images, even the smirk of the man who muttered wrong address when delivering a package addressed correctly to D. Jefferson. He knew how they moved. They weren't trying to evict him. Not with force, not in daylight. They wanted discomfort to do the work. Subtle erosion, a campaign of slow humiliation. But Darius had lived through worse. On the third day, a white envelope slid beneath his door. No name. No return address, just typed in bold, center-aligned. This community has a standard to uphold. Please consider relocating to an area more fitting. Gentrification is progress, not protest. He read it once, then again, then laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. They always framed theft as improvement, displacement as elevation. He held the letter up to the light, scanned the fibers. Printer ink still faintly wet, likely local, likely recent, likely next door. He slipped the note into a plastic sleeve, labeled it Exhibit A. That night he visited the attic. It still smelled like mothballs and cedar, old boxes from the 70s, a broken lamp, Grandma Odell's sewing machine. He found the wooden chest buried beneath a faded quilt, her memory box. He hadn't opened it since before law school. Inside, handwritten recipes, pressed flowers, and one thick manila folder labeled Gentrification Battle, 1989, newspaper clippings, letters from attorneys, petition signatures. Odell had fought this same war 35 years ago, when a developer tried to buy out the block one family at a time. She had organized, resisted, and won. She didn't go to Harvard. She didn't need to. She had her voice. And now, so did he. The next morning, Darius wore a navy blazer over his t-shirt and jeans, set up a folding table on the lawn, taped a handwritten sign to the front. Know your property rights. Free legal advice. Homeowners welcome. It took 15 minutes before the first neighbor walked by, then paused, then turned back. An older black couple from 3 doors down. Mr. Clay and Miss Marion. We heard what happened the other day, Marion said softly, eyes on the cuffs still branded faint on his wrist. Darius nodded. I'm staying, she smiled. Good. This neighborhood got memory they just forgot. By sunset, 5 more people had stopped by. 2 asked about zoning laws. 1 whispered about property taxes that didn't match. 1 just sat and said, "Thank you." And from across the street, the woman in the yoga tights stood frozen at her window, watching the table grow more crowded, watching the very community she thought she'd bought her way into begin to circle around him, not with noise, but with knowing. By Friday, the whispers had turned into momentum. More chairs on Darius's lawn, more quiet nods from homeowners who used to walk with heads down. It was like the neighborhood had remembered something, or maybe someone. One woman, Ms. Laverne, brought him lemonade and a folder, thick with property records from her block. They tried to tell me I owed $5,000 in back assessments, she said, her voice shaking. I've been paying on time every month since '97. Darius opened the documents, scanned the numbers. You don't owe them a dime. Her eyes welled up. I didn't think I had anyone to ask. You do now. By the end of the day, his porch had become a quiet office, his laptop open, scanner whirring, printer buzzing. He had plugged into the same Wi-Fi network the neighborhood claimed he didn't belong to. And he was using it to build a case, a real one, because that envelope under his door. The comments from the association, the selective enforcement of rules, the false 911 call, the intimidation letters. It was all pattern, and patterns were evidence. Next morning, someone left a yard sign in front of his walkway. No trespassing, neighborhood watch active. Darius stared at it for a moment, then walked out in his robe, coffee in hand, plucked it up, and leaned it gently against the base of a young tree. Then he placed his own sign in its place. This land was paid for. In sweat, bread, and generations. We're still here. A few people driving by slowed down to read it. 1 honked twice. That afternoon, the HOA president finally made her appearance, Rebecca Caldwell, blonde, pressed, and never without her iPad. She stepped onto his lawn like she owned it, which legally she did not. Mr. Jefferson, may I have a word? Darius stood from his seat beneath the porch fan. He didn't smile. I'm busy, but I've got a minute. She glanced around, clearly disapproving of the folding chairs, the legal pads, the black elders on his porch sipping tea. We've received some concerns, she said carefully, about your recent gatherings. It may constitute unpermitted community organization on residential property. You mean people sitting in their own neighborhood talking? I'm saying you're disrupting the peace. He held up his phone. Is this before or after you emailed my old job? Because I've got the server trace. Don't worry, I don't work there anymore. Took a sabbatical. But still, bold move. Her jaw clenched. That wasn't from me. It came from your HOA email, the one with the tagline, Building Tomorrow's Communities. She swallowed. Look, this isn't personal. We have rules. I know. I've read them. More than once. Want me to quote the clause about racial intimidation? It's in your bylaws, Section 12, Line 4, you just forgot. He stepped forward slow. This isn't 1955. You don't get to whisper me off my own land. You don't get to decide who belongs based on the length of my grass or the width of my nose. Rebecca took half a step back. And before you say another word, you should know I filed for a preliminary injunction against HOA overreach and discriminatory enforcement. You'll be getting served by Wednesday. She opened her mouth, then closed it. He smiled finally. Have a blessed day. That night, the porch light stayed on late. Laughter rolled from the steps. Music played soft from a speaker tucked behind the front door. Someone brought chess. Someone else brought peach cobbler. And across the street, for the first time, the blinds didn't twitch. They stayed shut, like shame had settled in. The invitation came on embossed cardstock, the kind meant to intimidate without saying a word. You are invited to the quarterly HOA General Assembly. Attendance is mandatory for all residents. It was left in his mailbox, folded with precision. No salutation, no welcome. Just a date, a time, and a location. The community clubhouse, a building that used to be the Black Church's annex before it was bought, gutted, and turned into a glassy hall with cold folding chairs and even colder glances. Darius placed it on the kitchen table, then circled the date in red. The night of the meeting he arrived early. Alone. No entourage, no folding chair brigade. Just a man in a charcoal suit, polished shoes, and a briefcase that clicked open. With authority, the room stilled when he entered, rows of tight smiles, unblinking eyes. People who had seen him on the porch but never thought they'd see him in the clubhouse. The HOA board sat in a half circle at the front, beneath a giant mounted flat screen. Rebecca was already there, spine stiff, eyes scanning. Like radar. Darius chose a seat in the third row, opened his briefcase, pulled out a yellow legal pad and a fountain pen. He didn't speak. Just waited. The meeting dragged through the usual charade. Lawn regulations, mailbox paint colors, and updates on a proposed community surveillance system that everyone knew was code for selective policing. Then came new business. Rebecca cleared her throat. We've had an uptick in unregistered group activity on private property, which has raised safety concerns. Her eyes flicked to Darius. We believe it's appropriate to revise our community engagement policy to prevent gatherings that violate the peace or give the impression of official representation. Darius stood. Calmly, every head turned. He didn't raise his voice. My name is Darius Jefferson. I'm a licensed attorney and the rightful deed holder of 415 Roseview Drive, willed to me by my grandmother, Odell Jefferson, whose name is in your community's original charter, by the way. Silence, he continued. I've reviewed your current bylaws. Nowhere do they prohibit residents from having guests, discussions, or, God forbid, community support gatherings. What is prohibited, however, is targeted enforcement and racially motivated intimidation. He held up a small stack of printed images, surveillance screenshots, comments from the neighborhood group chat, even the anonymous letter, now traced. I have enough evidence here to support a federal complaint. Murmurs rippled. But I'm not here to file that. Not yet. I'm here to remind you, we built this neighborhood. My grandmother didn't just live on that street. She fought for it. When developers tried to run people off with buyout offers and bad plumbing, she stood up. He paused. Let that name echo. Odell. Somewhere in the back, a woman whispered. I remember her. Darius softened his voice. I'm not leaving, I'm not moving. I'm not giving you the satisfaction of another empty porch that you can sell off to the highest bidder. If peace is what you want, then act like neighbors. If war is what you want, bring better lawyers. Then he sat back down. The room was quiet, awkward, breathing shallow. Rebecca looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. But no one challenged him. No one could. Outside, as the meeting let out, one of the older board members, a man with silver hair, and a cane, tapped Darius gently on the arm. "She used to bake pies," he said softly. "Your grandma, for the kids who didn't have lunch money." Darius nodded. "She didn't leave the recipe," the man smiled. "But she left you." And across the parking lot, several neighbors who had never once looked his way now offered silent nods. Because in one meeting, the man they cuffed on his own porch had become something they couldn't ignore. The rain came hard that Sunday, the kind that clapped against windows and ran like veins down the sidewalk, but it didn't stop Darius. He was in the crawl space before dawn, inspecting the old foundation beams with a flashlight between his teeth. Grandma's house was sturdy, but the water line in the basement had crept up half an inch overnight. Years of patchwork repairs were peeling back. It didn't matter. He'd already filed for the grant, not the kind the HOA knew about, but the kind passed quietly in state legislation, meant to help descendants of black homeowners hold on to legacy property in gentrifying zones. Most folks didn't even know it existed, but Darius did, because he read everything. By noon he was back on the porch, damp from the knees down but typing fast. Legal documents, affidavit templates, and emails to city council. Then a knock at the gate. He looked up, cautious, until he saw the umbrella, and the man beneath it, mid-40s, wide shoulders, khakis damp at the hem, and a nervous smile. "Hey," the man said, lifting the umbrella slightly. "You're Darius, right?" "I am. I'm Jordan. I live 2 houses over. Sorry I haven't introduced myself sooner." Darius nodded, waiting. Jordan cleared his throat. "I've been watching, not in a weird way, just, what you're doing out here, it matters." Darius leaned back slightly. "You on the board?" Jordan looked sheepish. "I was. I stepped down last week." Darius raised an eyebrow. Jordan glanced over his shoulder. "I didn't like the direction it was going. Rebecca doesn't speak for all of us. Honestly, I think half of us have no clue what bylaws we're even enforcing." Darius didn't smile, but something in his shoulders eased. "I've got a son," Jordan continued. "Mixed. His mom's Dominican. I don't want him growing up thinking silence is safe." Darius finally spoke. "It's not." Jordan reached into his coat, handed him a flash drive. "Meeting recordings, group chat backups, things I think you should have." Darius took it without flinching. "Thanks. If you ever need help—" "I do," Darius interrupted gently. "Help me knock doors. Educate the others, not just the ones who look like us." Jordan nodded, jaw tight. "I'm in." By that evening, Darius had built a new map, printed plat sheets color-coded with red, yellow, and green. Red for homes under pressure, yellow for homes with elderly owners, green for those paid off but vulnerable to liens. He called it the Lineage Defense Grid. It wasn't just about Grandma's house anymore. It was about every black family they tried to erase from the block, every history rewritten as a vacancy on a real estate report. On Monday, a moving truck appeared. On the next block over, another elder forced out, this time quietly. No confrontation, just a city fine that turned into a lien that turned into foreclosure. Miss Aura, 92, widow. Lived there since 68. Her granddaughter cried as they loaded the boxes. "We tried to fight it. We just didn't know how." Darius didn't cry. He handed her his card. "You do now." That night, Rebecca drove by slow, saw the porch light still glowing, saw the community calendar nailed to the tree, saw new flyers in plastic sleeves being handed out by volunteers of all colors, and saw something she didn't recognize anymore. Unity. Not loud, but rooted, like the house itself. The news van rolled in just after lunch, subtle at first, a white Ford with peeling decals and a tripod poking out the back. But once the anchor stepped out in heels and a trench coat, neighbors began peeking through blinds. Channel 8, local, but big enough to rattle cages. Darius didn't flinch. He had sent the email 3 nights ago, not a plea, but a case brief. A structured, documented, bulletproof narrative of what had been happening in the neighborhood. The call to 911 on a homeowner, the unlawful HOA intimidation tactics, the zoning discrepancies, the foreclosure patterns, and attached, a 3-generation photo of Grandma Odell on that same porch, smiling in a lawn chair with Darius at age 7. That picture had done more than a lawsuit ever could. Mr. Jefferson, do you mind telling our viewers what's happening on Roseview Drive? He didn't dress up. He wore a plain navy hoodie, no tie, no suit, just him, clean, clear, unbothered. He looked into the lens like it owed him truth. This is about legacy, not just mine, not just my grandmother's, but every black family that's been pushed out of their own homes with coded language, red tape, and quiet threats. We're not fighting fire with fire. We're fighting erasure with memory. The anchor's mouth opened slightly. No one had prepped for that line. "And what's your goal here?" she asked. He tilted his head slightly. To stay, to educate, to protect. Then he glanced off camera. At Ms. Laverne, at Jordan, at 3 kids riding past on bikes who waved without fear. To remind folks we don't have to leave the land we built. That night, the clip went viral. Local first, then state. Then someone from a national blog reposted it under the headline, "They called the police on a black homeowner. Now he's teaching the whole block their rights." The comments poured in. Stories from Philly, Atlanta, Oakland, Brooklyn. People who had fought, people who had lost, people who had returned. The HOA tried to do damage control. They released a statement full of lawyer words and polished grammar, claiming miscommunication and community safety protocols. But it rang hollow, especially when someone, not Darius, leaked the anonymous letter to the press. 2 days later, the city councilman's aide called. "Mr. Jefferson, Councilmember Ruiz would like to meet with you. She's proposing an emergency review of HOA enforcement standards, especially around discriminatory practices." He didn't grin, just said, "Tell her I'll bring documents." By the weekend, the porch had changed again. Now it was a command center, a printer humming inside, a rotating pot of coffee, clipboards, volunteers, elders and teens alike. They called it the Porch Project. No flyers, no logos, just word of mouth, just truth. And Rebecca? She walked by once, just once, saw the porch full. Saw the sign, "Gentrification is not progress if it means erasure." She said nothing, just kept walking, faster, because even she could feel it now. She hadn't just lost control of the neighborhood, she'd lost the narrative. It was the first. Sunday in spring when the envelope finally came. Not slid under the door, not unsigned, but stamped official. With the city's seal and his name printed in full. Mr. Darius Ellison Jefferson, 415 Roseview Drive property owner and community advocate. He opened it on the porch, the same porch where they once cuffed him, where they once tried to humiliate him in front of his own history. Inside was the resolution, passed unanimously by City Council, a moratorium on HOA-led liens and fines in historically black neighborhoods, pending review of all prior enforcement actions, a grant to support restoration of heritage homes with cultural significance, a committee, co-chaired by Mr. Darius Jefferson, to oversee equity in community development citywide. He didn't smile right away. He just let it rest in his lap. Then he exhaled, long and slow, the kind of breath that had been building for years. Maybe generations. A week later, a knock came at dusk. He opened the door to find a young woman in her 20s, nervous, clutching a folder. Behind her, an older man waited by a car. "Hi, I'm sorry to just show up," she said. My name's Amari. My grandfather used to live here, before your grandma bought it. He was one of the first black homeowners. On this street, I saw you on the news. My dad said you might know how to help us keep our place. Darius opened the screen door. Come in. You're right on time. Later that night, he sat back in Grandma Odell's old armchair, lights low, watching the block from the window. The street had changed, not in color or code, but in clarity. People walked slower, stood longer, talked across fences again. The silence had lifted, not completely, but enough. On his desk sat the original deed, as now framed. Next to it, a photo of his grandmother holding a pie, grinning wide on this same porch, and below it, a small brass plaque he had nailed into the stair post. This house will never forget who loved it first.